Sorry about the delay, guys, but I'm back. Optimus Prime, leader of the Autobots. This guy does not need an introduction, because you know who he is and how much of a pop culture icon he is.
Optimus Prime, I know you're not evil!
You are nothing!
This guy's an upscaled KO version of the original Unique Toys Challenger, but like most upscales, he had some retooling, added bits and pieces to distinguish him from his original counterpart. May I present the BS-03, Cybertron Calvaliar.
That's quite big. Impressive.
With a name like that, you guys are just begging for a lawsuit, but before you take him to court, let's talk about the sculpt. The sculpting is great. It properly demonstrates itself as a proper imitation to his film counterpart, and with the added detail regarding the retool, it does such that. For example, the upper torso region, Challenger was more blocky looking due to his general sculpt. His truck doors have these parts that flip out to make him seem more rounded. Of course, I'm referring to BS-03 over here. Another example of retooling would be his independent articulated fingers. Challenger originally had weird transparent fingers that were more blunt. He had a conventional index finger, which was independent, while the rest are all glued together, which followed. It was more of an aesthetic popular with Transformers toys that had articulated fingers, quote-unquote. CC over here has its fingers individually independent on their own hinge joints. However, they're incapable of spreading apart. Another point, the bottom of Challenger's feet were once hollow, but here CC has his filled in with traction detail, which are wonderfully die-cast to include additional weight. Going back to his torso, I'm just going to put an image of Challenger's torso side by side with CC to see differential details, so you, the audience, can understand what I'm referring to. CC's chest appears to be more prominent from Challenger, less blocky as previously mentioned. The shin plates have Cybertronian hieroglyphics, unlike Challenger. Mind you, I tried to look at any DLX figures or movie renders to see if there's any accuracy. Insofar, there are some major improvements. However, I wish that the shoulder pads were slightly bigger, and also would accompany some hieroglyphics just as much as the shoulders. However, I believe that would hinder the transformation if that were to be the case. But frankly, this guy seems like a proper masterpiece-esque figure. His metal detailing is just wonderful. Yeah, you can see the oversized calves are not 100% accurate to the model, but I'll be a little contradictory soon. I'll get to that. The lower legs are where the wheels and the general bottom half of the truck are housed, and you can see the obvious smokestacks or pipe kibble, but you know, I don't mind that. So why do I feel conflicted regarding this iteration and the original design? Well, I do like the original Age of Extinction 2 Last Night design, like the last only fucking 5 people on this planet that do like it. I do like the knightly aesthetic, and I like how they made it, but I do have a few gripes. I heard many people online express their sentiments regarding this design as being a good robot design but not a good Transformer design. I will elaborate on this. In my Transformers Rise of the Beast review, whenever that comes out, I will argue and I will elaborate more specifically within that realm, but I see what people mean. The idea of the wheels being flipped out and hidden isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it challenges conventions, no pun intended. But it doesn't look like he can transform to anything really, except the obvious indication of these smokestacks. But for my biggest issue is the pecs. Look, I get what you were trying to do. You tried to make the plates bend to give them more of an organic silhouette, but it doesn't work for me. Let me explain. The positioning of the pecs and the lack of red parts on the torso makes him look like he's wearing a bra. Hey, I get it. I thought Shockwave got milkers in my opinion, but this is just a weird design. I get you trying to emphasize masculinity, but why not include prominent red bits to give him the illusion of abs or more red pieces surrounding the torso? It looks so off-putting when you realize the colored bits of Transformers are supposed to be the armor, while the silver bits are like some sort of skin, if you will. But that's just all I could say for my gripes, because everything else is just so smooth and cohesive. Nothing ever feels as if it interrupted in a way, if that makes sense. The face looks like he's missing some detail, but I think he needs a bit of dry brushing to make some of the details pop. Speaking of paint, I do prefer the darker, more muted colors of Challenger, but arguably this saturated iteration is more accurate to the absurdly cartoonish aesthetic of the last two Bayformer films. I swear, most of the fucking budget went into the goddamn truck in these films.
We've got a pre-existing juvenile foundational relationship. Statute 2705-3.
What?
I cannot deny he does look absurdly saturated within the films. I'm just not a fan of this, per se. Like, when he scanned the white truck, why couldn't he sport his classic blue and red deco, but with some white bits covering all over him? This is not an Age of Extinction review, but a toy review. I apologize. It's just a massive fucking, a pet peeve that I have when it comes to this goddamn film. All I'm saying is, how cool would it be if he looked similar to the PS4 Spider-Man? You know, the guy with the white, the suit where it has the white carbon fiber bits? You know what I'm on about? Oh man, that would have been, aesthetically pleasing, but back to the figure. The red and blue are respectfully shiny. They contrast each other wonderfully. But you will see these colors fully expressed once in truck mode. I also forgot to mention the paint is pretty durable thanks to some complimentary industry-grade foreign exported lead, which may or may not give you cancer for prolonged use. Enough with the grim notice, let's see this boy's flexibility. His head doesn't have a ball joint. It is on a conventional swivel joint that can also look up and down. Not very much though. But hey, he comes with an LED feature which balances that out. He sports a loose waist swivel. A bit of lubricant and or stiff lubricant should fix that right up. He cannot arch his back, but he can crunch forward. I forgot to mention my copy and my brother's are very loose, but thank fuck for this diecast part holding it all together. His arms, shoulders specifically, are on a hinge joint that can ratchet. His shoulder pads are on a hinge joint. His shoulder pads are on a ball joint. But careful when you see it, you have to examine its status out of the box first and try to see if the screw is moving with the arm. Tighten it or loosen it if needed. The shoulder is on a good ratchet, as previously mentioned. It can move this far, and like so. The biceps swivel, the biceps can swivel, but, it's pretty tight. His elbows bend, but not by much. His knees suffer from the same issue. His thighs cannot twist like conventional Marvel Legends, but they do shift somewhat due to the joint they're attached to. They could also shift up and down due to the transformation. The knee could bend, but not by much. I wish it was a double hinge joint. Frankly, if the joints were made of diecast, I would feel less concerned about it. I don't know if diecast just has this natural essence of reassurance. A bit of ratcheting is present towards the knees, but not by much. At times, I could feel it fading. That also needs to be worked on. His ankles could bend tremendously well, but it's due to the transformation. This shit, it just bends, flops, and, it goes all over the place. The ankles cannot move up and down, unfortunately, due to previously mentioned transformation, but his toes can bend pretty well. Also, make sure to add lubricant when needed. Mine was a little stiff. Let's see. I almost forgot to mention his wrists are on a mushroom peg. It could swivel and bend down, but it is limited due to the transformation. I mentioned the fingers briefly, but the fingers are not ball jointed or on multi-hinged, I should say. Something I'm not against. They can hinge independently, but they cannot spread out, meaning they only bend on a linear plane. However, I wish the thumb was on a ball joint, but that's all I could say for the hands. Articulation's pretty good, but it could be better. I understand how they can implement the things I asked for without making myself seem petty or inconsiderate, but I'm still trying to figure out how. Maybe it's just engineering limitations at the moment that I'm ignorant about, but I don't expect them to get any DLX figure or SH figure esque design or engineering to any degree. It's just how the figure is designed, and how, in terms of transformations, there are certain limitations you have to acknowledge and you have to actually just accept. But if there's going to be any workarounds or improvements in the future towards this aesthetic, it doesn't have to be another upscale or another KO, but it just has to improve from what its predecessor did, and that sort of notion. He comes in this very Chinese-looking box alongside a plethora of accessories. He comes with his recent gun shield. It could swivel and reveal his cannon that could extend too much so, and it will, droop eventually, but there's this medium where you could just extend it and it could just be straight. A bit of a faint black airbrushing is also around it, alongside the tips specifically. His sword is pretty interesting as well. That's what he comes with. I wish I had a bit of diecast in it, but it looks interesting nonetheless, thanks to the hieroglyphics around it. I believe the original Challenger did not possess this detail within his accessory. His staff from the last night, from what I understand, Challenger Avengers version lacks this additional detail. I like to act as if it's an additional weapon, like a club you can wield, in that detail that I mentioned. Is the hieroglyphics as well. His shotgun thingy, it has an LED. Thankfully so. I wish it possessed some diecast as well, but it isn't the worst. The button is hidden on the bottom. He also comes with this with his shitty wrist weapon that appeared in the last night. I wish it was an Energon sword that briefly fought Galvatron with before, you know, it fucking got eviscerated into his chest cavity. I almost forgot to mention, he comes with 2 heads that both give up the light up feature. His battle mask and his unmasked face. Overall, these accessories are great, well detailed and colored beautifully, thanks to the fucking industrial grade lead that may or may not give me cancer. He truly has an arsenal worth fearing. You can pull off some impressive poses with these accessories, but he's just, you know, he's just a treat to handle, and it's just general playability as well. However, these accessories do tend to feel a bit cheap, more or less. I cannot express more concerning the fact that I do wish there was diecast and they were engineered a bit better. But that's just generally my opinion. But at times when he's trying to hold them, they tend to droop, or his grip tends to have his grip tends to be weak, and he ends up like falling over at times. Well, his wrist does, but not the general robot, but that needs to be worked. So let us transform him. He comes with a manual, but everyone knows that I can't read, and I have little to no interest in reading, despite the manual being mostly comprised of images. But let's try to follow along. When transforming a figure, you need to realize it as its physical, like you have to realize it as a physical object and try to visualize what it looks like while it is fully transformed. Vehicles like trucks, cars, etc. are just boxes with inherent wheels. That's why most terrestrial vehicles work better as figures, unlike aircraft, which have atrocious scale and kibble, which they end up resorting to vague sci-fi aircraft, which ends up just being dog shit. Well, I'll do a whole lecture someday concerning this matter. They work better due to the rigid nature of a vehicle. You could store as much shit as you want in a box-like form, but unlike aircraft, which are just flattened cylinders with thin plates as wings, when they become toys, they end up looking fucked up. They look like fucked up kibble-infested scat packs. Fun fact, you can make an aircraft transformer in scale with terrestrial vehicles, without the current shit kibbles. But enough of the monologue, let's transform.
WTF to that?
Now we have the truck mode. I gotta say, I was initially never a fan of the Western Star Truck design or the modern Aero truck design, but I've grown accustomed to it. But I'm not sure if the color scheme is appropriate with this generation of trucks. This isn't to say trucks aren't allowed to be flamboyant or absurd like in the original squared cabs and cab-over from years past, but the original Peterbilt 379 design felt like a truck from the 80s. People give this design a lot of flack, but due to the flames, despite being the most 80s thing ever, I don't know what the fuck they're complaining about. But what about the physical toy? It is tough, sturdy, and really good to handle. Of course, the weight is shifted here to the cab section, reasonably so you can feel the die-cast contributing to the weight, of course. I almost forgot to mention the grills here are made of die-cast, which are a part of the whole foot assembly, and the entirety of the foot assembly is mostly made of die-cast. This is a good strategy to have a good support for larger figures. This entire truck is reliant on tension. This tension, this truck specifically, this truck bed here, if lifted, would make the whole thing flop. Same goes for the robot mode. The pecs, although made from a wonderful amount of die cast, they rely on holding everything fucking together. So I just want to lay out some general criticisms or me pointing out things that I find neat, for example, now, rather than just being a negative Nancy all day. There are some paint chips on the hamstrings of the figure. There are also butt skirts that I thought you couldn't move them, but they do. They do move. They have a hinge joint, so when you move the legs back, it should follow. These blue skirts, these blue skirts in the front are on a double hinge joint on a spring, or on the sides, I should say, on a double hinge joints. They don't tap in. They sort of protrude out. He looks like a paladin. His design in the film has these resting on the sides of his thighs, or are part of his thighs, rather than being individual entities, separate entities. Let's see. Concerning the matter of legs, although not accurate, I really like the fenders being the calves. I also like the exhaust pipes following. A lot of original detail within this figure. It tries to imitate the absurd detail of the original ILM model, but it has its own unique grounded design thanks to the transformation. The engineering is nice overall. The heels were originally the front bumper with the headlights, which are nice as well. Also, the nice detail about this guy is that the front wheels are hidden behind the grille. Surely you could still see the visibility, but it's nice. I wish the front skirts were made of flexible plastic. It hinders the movements of the legs a lot. Man, I talk about the legs a lot in this segment. The skirt does have hinges as well, and they flap and split independently. But I want to leave a brief comment. Transformer toys have an unspoken principle due to obeying the laws of the physical world. I touched this brief concerning how transformations and aircraft kibble and transformer planes and stuff, but some figures prioritize one mode over the other due to them obeying real-world limitations and mechanics. So BS-03 has its vehicle mode prioritized, but still manages to retain a good robot mode. But when it's something like Alien Attack, as you can see, this guy is relatively big. Here he is compared to some Studio Series figures. I have the Studio Series Starscream, Barricade, and Optimus Prime. Some Jurassic World Mattel figures for scale and reference. And the Beast of the Mesozoic T-Rex, because this motherfucker is a colossal piece of shit. And he's a metric for size. He's just a fancy paperweight, but I still love him. You get the general idea. He has some presence. And did you know that there are other fucking upscale TF toys that are just getting larger and larger? They fucking exceed this motherfucker. You don't understand. I got this guy for $94 originally. Now it is $99. I bought him because I couldn't find the original Challenger, and boy, was this guy worth it. So I thought, I bought a copy for my brother alongside my own copy, and some problems begin to emerge. Here are some photos on the screen. I understand that people criticize me and say I should have read the fine print, or realize that third-party Transformer toys are a hit or miss, which is certainly factual at times. It could be high quality or just piss poor. But before we solely blame the third-party Chinamen, in this case, because it's very easy to see, I would like to draw your attention to my Studio Series Starscream, right? Because this topic requires a bit of nuance. One of my favorite Transformers toys of all time would be the Studio Series Starscream. One day I was transforming him, and this piece specifically, the posterior of his alt mode, split. I get it. You should have been careful. Is that what you're going to say? Guess what? I wasn't going out of my way destroying my stuff and crying wolf. I wasn't fucking chucking it in concrete. I'll be lying to say this is my first time seeing such a thing. One of my favorite, all-time Transformers toys, all-time, would be the Evasion Mode Optimus Prime toy, which, the more I think about it, its Challenger's engineering seems to be inspired by this figure. I really liked this figure so much after it broke on me one day. I got the Wei-Jing, the oversized version. It was fun. It had die-cast, it had better paint, better accessories, more transforming bits, but the arms began to break just like my brother's copy. So, this is inherently a quality issue and an engineering issue to a certain degree, and I dread that my figure ends up in a similar manner. I foresaw this in a way. I had lubricant, I used it, I heated up certain joints, and exercised caution to the best of my ability, yet my brother's copy couldn't avoid that fate. He also exercised caution as well, regardless of what I did and what he did. I contacted TF Safari, some back and forth ensued, and eventually they issued me replacement parts. I realized this isn't just an official versus third-party matter, this affects both sides, and it's a weird combination of quality control and engineering as previously mentioned. Why did the Evasion Mode have these weird-ass arms? Why does Challenger have these weird-ass arms as well? This topic requires nuance. I will always say this. You can't just blame one side and the other without realizing they're two sides of the same coin, in a way. I adore this figure beyond belief. This is a very rare case where I could say if it wasn't for the faulty joints that are prone to breakage, if those were engineered well to stand the test of time, then this figure would have been a solid 9 out of 10. I understand the Transformer toys possess limitations because they're real world objects, unlike their CGI counterparts, where shit either phases out of reality or switches into a different model or compresses. So I feel it is justified to have such a, personally, I feel like these things have a justification to have such a price tag, because you're not only creating a good sculpt, you're also engineering something that is meant to go from a vehicle to a humanoid, which arguably requires more skill than just creating a well-detailed animal, which is just one thing. This, on the other hand, requires you to do two things at once. It's more difficult, arguably. Overall, I love what this figure has to offer. It has a few things holding it back, such as a lack of proper ankle articulation, being able to move up and down, and even knees even. Even if it were to be done, I have no idea how they would execute that. I'm still ignorant. The kibble and the space is used up efficiently. There isn't a single instance of unnecessary baggage or leftover parts just hanging around, as evident by some official products. I understand this thing was just upscaled and retooled by Black Mamba, a third-party company that doesn't really create anything original. They just add complementary modifications and improve here and there, but that's besides the point. The vehicle mode, although lacking antennas and fucking mirrors, is just as accurate as it can be. Well, to be fair, I can't really tell the difference between this and the actual Western Star Trek model.
Fuck you, Baltimore!
If you're dumb enough to buy a new car this weekend,
You're a big enough schmuck to come to Big Bill Hell's Cars!
bad deal.
Cars that break down!
Thieves.
If you think you're gonna find a bargain at Big Bill,
You can kiss my ass.
it's our belief that you're such a stupid motherfucker!
You'll fall for this bullshit.
Guaranteed!
It feels as if it was trying too hard, in a way, to emulate something that it isn't, without accepting to move on to be something new. It can also roll. It has weird rubber bits, but they're a little too tight, I guess. This little tab piece that is like the anchor of the torso, I mentioned this previously, the truck bed, becomes the trailer bed, which holds the legs together. It pieces together the general silhouette of the truck. This whole toy is reliant on tension. And, it's just something interesting that I would always point out. Not everything holds together, or tabs together, I should say. Most of the time, this figure relies on tension. I like this idea, but for example, my brother's copy around the windshield area, the tab for it broke. As much as I like the ball-jointed windshield segment, I feel as if this tab should have been thicker and more prominent, since the part holds the roof for the cab and the lower part of the truck, which is largely a large portion of the vehicle, which doesn't tab. It relies on tension. You find yourself constantly squeezing this thing every once in a while, in every which way. But I feel as if I'm being too negative. But such things need to be addressed. Another negative aspect about this figure is that it's very floppy and loose at times. I appreciate the die-cast spine, it promotes stability, but during the transformation, it becomes a fucking mess. I wish there was a bit of rubber between the hinges that hold the thing together. I wish that certain joints were engineered in a better way, with die-cast joints and rubber, as mentioned. So, certain joints like the elbows need to be engineered in a better way, efficient way to avoid breakage, to be designed to last. So do the tabs in certain regions as well, which are meant to hold things in place. But if those issues were to be addressed, the figure would be a solid 9 out of 10. But it is currently a 7.5 to an 8 out of 10. But to end on a positive note, I noticed there's a paint scratch on my copy. But this isn't something to complain about. This isn't a bad thing. This isn't going to be me crying over something I did, because frankly, the paint is pretty damn durable. It's actually impressive. It most likely causes cancer, as mentioned 2 to 3 times already. I'm going to run that joke out of the ground. So that is a sacrifice I'm only going to make. If Black Mamba wants to come out with a new version of this guy, I hope they improve on him significantly. That's all I have to say for this guy. Do I recommend? Yeah, pretty much, but not entirely.